right? And for me personally, every single time I spend more than time needed on a track, it sounds worse. And then I start to overmix, and then it makes me feel less confident, and I start to get in my own head. The faster that I mix, the better my mixes become, because I'm inspired. I remember, oh yeah, I want this section to feel bigger. I remember, oh yeah, the bass here, I want to like filter it out, and I want to do a reverb and delay throw here. It's still very subjective or objective for like the first few hours, and then after that, like, I have to take a couple days break. Not even the next day. I have to take a couple days, or else I can't. Mm-hmm. I lose all objectivity.
Yeah. I totally hear that. So it's like, hopefully you get it in that first 4 hour, marathon or sprint or whatever you want to call it. And then if you need to do like any adjustments or tweaks or revisions, it'll be a couple days later.
Yeah. So most of the time, like, that's what I'll send to the client. I'll work on it for 4 hours, like, boom. I'm feeling confident. It's like I've gotten to the point where like I've been doing that so long where I feel really confident to send them out to them. And surprisingly, like, there's a lot of one and dones. Like, I've done it in front of people. Like, sometimes I actually oftentimes I invite the artist to watch me mix, whether it's through Zoom or in person. Sometimes I feel bad. I'm like, I know you paid the amount of money you did. We just spent 2.5 hours on this and we're done. And like this happened like the other week. And he's like, yeah, I've been listening to it all week, and we're definitely done.
Yeah.
But there are times where I know that I'm losing objectivity in a mix. So then, like, I won't send them anything, and I won't say anything like, hey, I'll have it done in the next couple of days. And then I listen to it either the next day or the day after, just to confirm my suspicions. And most of the times my suspicions are correct, and I just want to tweak a few things. But I can usually tell when I'm losing objectivity.
Yeah, I think that's like a secret, right? Or like that's a secret power that you have, is like knowing when you're objective, when you're not objective. I feel like that's so important to be clued in on. And I guess you could observe, the mixes that you do, and, okay, I've been noticing that I kind of do really well if I work between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. or like whatever. And then I start to things, you could like kind of observe how it goes statistically. But in the moment, to be aware of, I'm losing it, like, let's stop. That's important. It's important to know that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I actually, can we go back a second? Because you kind of mentioned how you start with the bass. Maybe, and I guess I'm assuming that's how it knocks so hard. What's the thought process with starting with the bass?
A little sprinkle of no reason, just a little sprinkle of no reason, just habit.
Yeah.
But for me, every time I do the drums and I get through the full kit and then I do the bass, it's a little bit easier for me to do, like, the time in between. It's like if I start with the bass and then immediately go into the kick drum instead of doing the kick drum, the snare, and getting all that squared away and then doing the bass, I feel like I get it to sit a little bit better. And my low end, I appreciate your compliments, but my low end is not always perfect. There's definitely some songs which sound way better than others. I think a great example of someone who gets the perfect, like, really great low end every time is Bob Horn, a good friend of mine. And his low end is ridiculous. I love his low. But anyway, a sprinkle of no reason. Leslie said it best. He said during the seminar, a lot of engineers have habits. And if you ask them why they do things, it's like, no reason. And, and that's totally fine. That's totally fine. That's a valid reason.
I'm going to try that, actually. I'm a bass player, so bass is a big part of who I am and what I do. But it kind of makes sense. Like, I feel like a lot of times you try to get the kick perfectly, and then you try to get the bass to work with the kick so that the kick is already punchy, and the bass is just working with that. And then maybe you could get bigger bass if if you could kind of like adjust the kick to match it better,
Yeah.
It's like a reverse way of looking at it almost, but.
Yeah, and then that's kind of how, like, gain stage as well, like with volume, like the only time that I really ever pay attention to my meters is when I like level the bass, because that's the only track that's unmuted at the time, right, when I start. So I kind of put it at that minus 18 dB sample peak. I'm always doing sample peak metering on Pro Tools, so like, and then just kind of get into that barely in that light green thing and kind of base the rest of the mix off of that as well. So it's like a foundational thing as well for me, I think.
Right.
But to be fair,
yeah,
I haven't thought much about why as hard as I am right now.
That's awesome. Good for you, man. Well, it seems to be working for you, so I'm glad to hear that. Are you working off of templates? Are you entirely in the box? What does that look like for you?
So I'm hybrid. I say I'm hybrid, but most of the time recently I've been in the box. Partially because when I'm streaming on Twitch, my equipment and the setup and the routing is not, I can't go out of the box when I'm streaming, and I do a lot of like mixing on stream, and which takes a lot of confidence. Can I talk about that? I'm so proud about how how I can.
It's your episode,
How I can mix on how I can mix on Twitch and like not feel overwhelmed and really insecure. Like mixing has become something so like every time I sit down and do a mix, it's gotten to the point where I sit down, no matter how bad or good of a job I do, I sit down and I'm like, damn, I'm good. I don't know many other people, let alone things that people do where as humans, we feel that. Like we do anything and sit down and be like, damn, I'm good. Like, it's just one of those things where it's just mixing has become so healthy for me. So I'm more proud of the fact that I've been able to overcome it, my imposter syndrome, my insecurity so much that like I can shamelessly mix on Twitch. And it's just awesome. And then...
So you're talking about in the box hybrid.
Yeah, so I'm mostly in the box. I have a couple out of the box pieces. I think the most underrated analog piece that I have, and granted, you're talking to the dude that has a CL1B and 1073s and some Shadow Hills equipment at the studio and whatnot. My favorite, and I will always promote them. Have you heard of Golden Age?
Yeah.
They have for $600 brand new, $600 USD in America, brand new. They have their Comp 2A, the LA 2A clone, the best. Like, I will not go out of the box unless it's worth it. That is one of those pieces that's worth it. It is insane how good it is for the price point. Like, I even did shootouts with like vintage LA 2As. Sometimes beat those in a personal opinion matter. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's all your own opinion. That sounds amazing.
But even then, like if I can get it right without it, I'll get it right without it. Like I only pull out analog equipment when it's like I know I need this in order to get to the next level, but most of the time I can figure out without it.
I had an interesting chat with a guy named Daniel Silberman about how to, and a lot of what we talked about was like his stereo bus processing and how he's able to kind of faux the analog thing inside the box because it's better for recalls, and using stuff like the channel strips from Plug and Alliance where you kind of get slightly different things on each channel. There's each one's a bit different, and all that kind of like saturation and goodness, and you could kind of cheat your way to an analog sound, but it takes a lot more work, right? Like it's the stuff that you get from analog is like instantaneous. But
and granted, can I argue with this? And
go ahead.
What is the analog sound? Like, define the analog sound to me.
Yeah, I would say saturation, glue, that kind of thing.
But like, unless we were A-Bing, like if we were to just listen to a record, could you say, oh, that was mixed on analog without a doubt?
Oh no, for sure not.
So I think the payoff, and this is my reasoning with analog equipment, my thought process is that one, it's less efficient, and I'm making less money per hour. So let's talk about financially, economically.
Yeah.
I really like what Chris Graham said on your podcast about how if you pay a crap ton of money on gear, then you feel like you have to use it. Even
I
if
was
it's
just
not the
thinking
best
about
joint,
that,
which is a really good point. So I think it throws in bias, unnecessary bias. I think it creates a sense of elitism that causes more insecurity in this world. For example, like I was hanging out with Tizio did a seminar with us the other week, and Tizio, who mixes for Lil Nas X, Jack Harlow, and obviously Chris Brown, right? Even he gets like all the marketing and all of the mastering engineers and mixing engineers do magic. That all of this marketing it's gotten to the point where he felt uncomfortable having a mixing masterclass and wanted to do a recording masterclass because he didn't feel qualified. Are you kidding me? 18 times platinum engineer? Like, what are you talking about? How many more accolades? I really do think that the marketing and the idea of analog equipment is actually more hurtful to the ideologies and the confidence that should be instilled in these artists than anything else. I love analog gear. I think it does have a sound. I've met people that I showed my hybrid mix to, and they're like, actually, there's one specific person who I won't name, but he's like, oh, I can tell you mix this in the box. And that was a moment in my life where I'm like, oh, okay, socially speaking, economically speaking, even sonically speaking, it's not really helping at all. It's just a different preference. So I love analog gear. I respect it. I'm glad that I'm now in a point where I own some, where if I hated analog gear without owning any, it'd be a different story. But I do think that relying on it or thinking that you need it is hurtful. And I don't think that the analog sound is only achievable in analog, and nor do I think that it's better. Did you know, this is something that I learned from Ian Shepard's Mastering podcast, The Mastering Show by Ian Shepard.
That's a great podcast, by the way.
Yeah. Have you listened to a few of his episodes?
I binged it a few years ago.
Do you remember in his analog and digital versus digital episode, he talked about vinyl And he's like, okay, first off, there usually have to be 2 tape machines, so there'd be a few second delay so the mastering engineer can anticipate for any moves that might pop the lathe out, as it's like you're cutting the vinyl. And then he said in the late 70s and most of the 80s, instead of having 2 expensive tape machines that had to be calibrated, they introduced a digital delay. The most regular digital delay system was an 8-bit digital delay system. And at the very best, at the top of its game, it was 12-bit. And so basically all of those analog records that people love and know so much are worse than MP3 quality digital processing. Isn't that went through worse than MP3 digital? Isn't that crazy?
Well, but it didn't come out 12-bit, right? Like it doesn't sound 12-bit.
So I'm sure that there's science that I'm alluding to that I'm not going to pretend like I understand. But you should listen to his episode because he is a master.
I think I heard that one. I heard that one. Yeah.
Yeah, he is a master. I'm not in that scenario. But it just puts into perspective. Like, I think it's awesome. I think that it can be hurtful, but it also can be helpful.
Yeah.
It's not one or the other. It's definitely like a yin and yang balance type thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you, man. I think in this day and age, and it's also the recalling thing. But you need a good computer, you need a good interface, that's going to do a good job of A to D and D to A, and you need good speakers in a good room. I think that's basically what you need for mixing, and that's about it.
I am a huge advocate of spending all of your budget. If you have a budget, fucking get a Focusrite 2i2. I don't give a shit. But get great monitoring and acoustics as much as possible. That's the one thing, like, I will not spend $3,000 on a compressor if I don't have to, but I will spend $12,000 on speakers. Like, and I have. Like, I've owned the big ATCs. I've owned big TMCs. Currently on a pair of monitors that Jesse Ray Ernster, another mixer, put me onto called Strauss.
Yeah, he's been on the show, Jesse Ray.
Yeah, he's awesome. And he put me onto the Strauss, and we're good friends, and that's what I'm sticking with right now. I'm a big fan, like, don't spend money on equipment, don't spend money on plugins, spend money on acoustics and getting your acoustics right, getting a cloud, getting the acoustic treatment, and your monitoring system. I don't care if it's a 2i2, get good monitors. I do think that DACs have that do change quality, but I do think monitors more.
Yeah, for sure the interface affects what's coming out of the speakers, but it's not going to affect how it, bounces inside your DAW, right? It's going to be the same quality inside the DAW. Like, that's not going to affect anything.
And then also taking the time to learn your speakers. Holy crap. Like, for me, personally, I don't do car tests because I listen to music casually and analyze music. I think that for me, my referencing comes before the mix. So I do a lot of referencing and listening to music casually in my listening position more than I ever would in my car. So that's why I never have to do a car test, is because it's very intentional. I know what it's supposed to sound like right here. That
and AirPods.
Yeah. Oh, fair. Although I lost my AirPods, so since then
this is my second pair, and I'm not even an iPhone user. I'm an Android user, but I got the AirPods.
You can use them.
Yeah, you can. And I got them because I'll shout out Sam Moses on his podcast. Somebody, I'm not remembering his name, recommended using AirPods because it's the most listened to, headphone that anybody is listening to. Like, most people in America are monitoring music through AirPods. So that should be, your final test to see what it's going to sound like for the user, the end product.
I agree with that. I think that's
damn.
phenomenal.
So AirPods, and they're, they have a sound. It's okay. It's not horrible. It's not great, but I could pretty much tell if some, if I'm working on a record now, and I was referencing all the mixes this morning on my AirPods just to kind of get like a little QA somewhere else. And I was like, oh, cool, the snare was a bit too loud there, and just put some notes, and you kind of like realize things when you're also out of your element, and my room is well treated, and I mean, not Strauss level, but I got like focals, so like, but still, like, sometimes you got to leave your environment, and
yeah. And honestly, I think it comes down to a confidence thing where, for example, I don't really care what you use to monitor, and I don't really care how much you spend money into it. My big thing with anything, including plugins and any sort of mixing process, is it's got to be intentional. For example, I'm always out in my life and doing discourses on how, just disproving people's YouTube myths that they discovered, YouTube things that they discovered. Like, you should low cut everything. I'm like, all right, let's first talk about why. My favorite one to dispel, which also came from Ian Shepherd, is widening your bass, monoing out your bass. Why people think they should mono your bass. That was actually a technical inferiority, the reason why that came out. He talked about how...
Yeah, because of vinyl.
Yeah, exactly. And then
Yeah.
Jason Joshua talked about in one of, I think, was it Mixed with the Masters? Maybe it was something else. Jason Joshua talked about how one of his secrets is in